Hello and welcome to The Drum. I'm Dan Borsha, coming to you from the lands of the Gadigal people. Coming up, workforce squeeze, why low unemployment means some of us are working harder. Voice debate leading yes and no figures call out lies and personal attacks. And saving our kids inside the landmark police operation hunting online predators. Joining me on the panel, Scientia Associate Professor of Criminology at the School of Social Sciences at UNSW, Michael Salter. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
In Brisbane, author and columnist for the new daily Madonna King. Great to have you along.
You too. Thanks, Dan.
In Melbourne, CEO of the National Voice for Our Children, SNAICC, Liddle. Welcome back.
Thank you.
And joining us soon, spokesperson for the Australians for Unity campaign and Liberal Party member Warren Mundine. And you can join us online using the hashtag The Drum, and we live stream on Facebook as well. First, though, to the jobs market, and while there have been warnings of impending job losses as the economy slows, official figures today show the unemployment rate held steady in August at 3.7%. Close to 65,000 Australians found work last month, most of them part-time positions, while a record number of people are now either in work or looking for a job. Employment Minister Tony Burke says more women and younger Australians are finding employment.
We've had more than 500,000 jobs created, but under this government, female employment has never been higher, female full-time employment has never been higher.
Order.
Female full-time employment is up by nearly 200,000 jobs, and in today's labour force figures, the number of Australians in work has never been higher. The participation rate has never been higher. Youth employment has never been higher.
Order.
The statistics also reveal that many Australians are working longer hours to make up for a lack of staff in their workplace. Madonna, I want to start with you. 3.7% was where unemployment stayed at today for August, seasonally adjusted. What did you make of that jobs data?
I think we can't take it out of context. As a headline, it looks great, right? But when you look at the figures, so 65,000 jobs created in August, but 62,000 of those were part-time when you look at the fine print. I think you just said, people are working longer because they can't get a staff. In some cities, perhaps Brisbane's an example of it, we've become a victim of our own success. We're supposed to be preparing for an Olympic Games with massive infrastructure projects announced, but we also have a growing problem with homelessness and the need for social housing. We can't get staff on construction sites for either of those. So while you look at the headline, when you look at the fine print, there's a whole lot of other issues. And I think probably the one most important is, this has raised the spectre of, do we need another interest rate rise? And I think to people out there, the psychology of even that talk, I find quite depressing. You think, all right, we've just got here, now the mortgage is stabilised, and now we're thinking, well, perhaps we'll have to go again. And I think so, while it's good as a headline, I don't think the government can jump up and down as Jim Chalmers did today and say, this is wonderful news, until we read the small print and see it as a trend over coming months.
Yeah, well, Catherine, that's exactly what you've been doing, isn't it? Looking beyond the headline. Yeah. On that front, what were your takeaways?
Oh, look, again, very similar. It's a wonderful headline. However, we know that there are very few jobs in regional and remote areas, particularly if they are Indigenous communities. We know that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are grossly overrepresented in the unemployment figures, and we know that the jobs aren't there. We know that the houses aren't there. We know the infrastructure's not there. So we're really keen to see movement in that area. We also know that when we're talking about things like interest rate rises, it is those communities facing the highest vulnerabilities that are feeling the pinch the tightest. We also know that when families feel the pinch, we see a more likelihood of families getting into trouble, and that's not a good thing.
Michael, both Madonna and Catherine have touched on the Reserve Bank. Do you get a sense of what these numbers will mean for the RBA at the next meeting?
And I think that's really the critical question, which is that the RBA is relying on unemployment as a kind of counter-inflationary force. Now, unemployment's actually looking pretty good, which you'd think is great news. But it does, I think, raise the prospect of another rate hike. And, interest rates, unemployment, these are the forces that we use to try and tame inflation. And, as Catherine said, they hit the most vulnerable people first. They are the people that absorb the shock as we try and force inflation down.
Madonna, still on the RBA, do you think it's on track to deliver that soft landing, which is that it return to inflation in Australia to the target band of around 2 to 3% without hiking rates too dramatically?
Impossible to say. All I've got to say is, fingers crossed, because I think, when we talk about these figures and we talk about these decisions, often what we don't consider is the impact on people. I think the last year, and 12 hikes in a row before it stopped, I think the impact on that was palpable, in regional and rural Australia particularly. And I think that cost of living is a priority issue that has just kind of put everything down, from the voice to everything else, because it's the first thing and the last thing some families are thinking about. And so you would hope that interest rates have done their job. The hikes over the last year have done their job. But based on these figures, I think it would be quite foolish to say that they're not going to go up again, or when they might indeed come down, because there's a lot of people listening and watching who would hope that their mortgage actually can fall a little bit over the coming 12 months.
And Catherine, as well as looking at trends and keeping an eye on what's happening month to month, there are also some comparisons, aren't there? In July, lots of full-time jobs were lost. Last month, we saw a surge in part-time work. What is that telling you?
Oh, I think it's telling us that the jobs actually aren't really there, and I think it also tells us that it also hides who might have those part-time jobs. So they might be, in particular, young people, so they might be being picked up, but they're not actually earning enough money to live off. And again, that talks more to what we were saying before about what the impact of price increases are. Young people trying to study at university, what's that look like? They're in those part-time figures. What does it look like? I'd really be keen to understand what a bag of grocery looks like if you're a university student right now. I'd also be really keen to look at what a comparable bag of grocery looks like for someone living on a remote community right now, because that was mentioned, and before the hikes, people were dealing with fuel prices of, $4 per litre. I suspect that's even higher now.
Michael, when you hear all of that, are you thinking about, well, what is the actual state of the economy and what impact does all of this have on people and Australians right now?
I think that's absolutely right, and the effect on the political climate. We'll be speaking about the voice in a moment, but it's the way in which, cost of living pressures are so real and so immediate for people, and they really just take up so much oxygen in the room at a time where, there are a lot of issues that the country is dealing with simultaneously. This is just the baseline bread and butter issues that people are struggling with.
Madonna, it was also revealed today that Australia's population is growing by a record 2,000 people a day. Now, this is fuelled in the largest surge of migration in history as international students are rushing back to complete their studies. What do you make of this, and what sort of impact do you see this potentially having on employment and jobs?
Well, I think the impact on housing and our homeless is probably front and centre where I live in Queensland, because while we have a great migration story in terms of interstate and international migration, and we actually even need that to fill some of those construction jobs, I asked someone today and they said, but there is nowhere for them to live. And I think, Sydney certainly is suffering this same issue. It's okay to say, more people are coming in and more people are coming in, and that may be good for some in some ways, but we've also got to house people at a time when supplies are most expensive, and when we don't have the labour to actually build the houses in which people stay. And until we can work out that balance and how to do that, and perhaps cut government red tape so housing, and particularly social housing, can be built more quickly, then I think we're kind of on this mouse wheel that's going around and around, and it's not going to create any solutions, certainly.
As we heard earlier, today's job numbers show over the past 12 months, Australians have been working longer hours or burning the midnight oil. But property developer Tim Gurner made waves this week after saying he thought workers were getting too big for their boots and suggested tradies especially weren't working hard enough. Take a look.
I think the problem that we've had is that we have people decided they didn't really want to work so much anymore through COVID, and that has had a massive issue on productivity. Tradies have definitely pulled back on productivity. They have been paid a lot to do not too much in the last few years, and we need to see that change. We need to see unemployment rise. Unemployment has to jump 40, 50% in my view. We need to see pain in the economy. We need to remind people that they work for the employer, not the other way around. I mean, there's been a systematic change where employees feel the employer is extremely lucky to have them, as opposed to the other way around.
All of your body language of the three of you all reacted as you heard that. I want to just go around and see what everyone's reaction is. Michael, I'll start with you.
Look, I just think it's a mask-off moment for some very, very privileged and ignorant people out there who really don't understand just the day-to-day struggle and the fundamental contribution that workers make to this economy. The idea that, you know, we should feel lucky to have a job, as opposed to, you know, we as a country should feel fortunate that we've got people who work as hard as Australians do every single day. And, you know, it's one thing to sort of stand there with millions of dollars and inherited wealth and your parents' mansion and say, you know, unemployment should rise by 50%. I mean, I can name a few people I'd like to see at the front of the unemployment queue based on that video.
Catherine, what about you? What did you think?
Oh, look, my team works hard and I value them. They are like gold. They are so precious to us. So we are constantly looking for ways to ensure that we are offering the best benefits and the best environment because we know they're working hard. And particularly with the cost of living rises, you know, we know that our team's doing it tougher than they ever have before. So what do we do to ensure that they are safe and they are cared for? And I'd say post-COVID, you know, we've learnt to work differently. We've got team members all over the country. That is a gift. It's challenging, don't get me wrong, it's challenging, but I really like the new work environment.
Madonna?
I think it was badly worded and I disagree, but I think he's getting to something that many employers in the public and private sector are facing where some people are working from home, some people aren't. And I do worry long term about an inequality in our nation over that. You know, the lollipop lady or the lollipop man outside the school or the people on a road gang don't have that opportunity to work from home. And I think post-COVID, while it's wonderful that flexibility, we've kind of got to work through that conversation around that there is a level of unfairness in some jobs over others. And I think maybe he was trying to say that in one part, but it came out in a very different way.
Yeah, well, it certainly didn't come out like that. Michael, just to round out this section, did you get the sense that part of those comments, which have taken the internet by storm, was about creating controversy?
Look, I mean, I hope that the effect was somewhat intentional for him because we're looking at tens of millions of views. AOC in Washington was commenting on it. And if anything, I think it's really kind of galvanised people to push back at this mentality that you can just squeeze people and squeeze people and squeeze people to get good macroeconomic outcomes. You know, we're human beings, we need to live good lives and economic policy needs to work for all of us.
Well, let's move on now to the way we talk to our kids about sex and online safety. The New South Wales Government has today announced an overhaul of sex education classes where students will learn about power imbalances, consent and the fact that photos shared online last forever. The way images are stored and sometimes weaponised is a key theme of a new book called Save Our Kids. It's the inside story of Task Force Argos, a specialist branch of Queensland Police investigating online child sexual abuse. It looks at sextortion, which is the combination of sex and extortion, a crime which our panellist and book author Madonna King thinks has reached epidemic proportions. Madonna, I want to go to you first. What exactly is sextortion? What is it that we're talking about here?
It's extortional bribery over images. So if you have a son, they are targeted in a very different way to a female. With females, someone will join them online and say, look, hey, I think we know each other through a rowing regatta or a netball. Do you want to be friends? Most of our teenagers will say yes to that and a conversation will ensue. Before long, that new friend might say something as simple as send a picture of a pair of breasts and say, look, mine look really odd. Are yours the same or are mine too big? Or it's normal for our tweens and teens to think about those things. And often good kids might want to act out online rather than in real life. And so our daughter may then send a picture of her own breasts. And that's the point where the pedophile on the other end has her, because it's not a peer, it's not a friend, it's not someone she's met elsewhere. It is a pedophile online who then threatens or sextorts that if she doesn't show bigger images or do more online on camera in front of him, he will upload those photos or movies to everyone she knows in her computer book, in her online friendship list, to schools, to her teachers, to her parents. And this is just breaking children. But probably, we've always known that girls can be a target in a way. What is becoming very, very common, and I've spoken at several schools in Sydney and Brisbane in the last 2 weeks, is the way they are targeting boys. Now, these are organised crime gangs. They may be in Nigerian call centres of the Ivory Coast or the Philippines, and they are paying locals to contact Australian boys, and they are acting as young, attractive girls. They get online, they see our son's public friendship list, and they offer them a friendship and say, you know, they might say, look, we know such and such and such and such in common, because they can see that on their public friendship list. What 17-year-old or 16-year-old boy is not going to then allow them to be a friend? Julian Grant, the Safety Commissioner, the AFP, former Inspector John Rouse, says boys can then respond with a naked image in as little as 3 minutes. So the person purporting to be a girl, who is really a scammer based in a call centre, will send a picture that they say is a naked picture of them. Boys will then respond. And what those scammers will then do is say, we now have this picture of you and we are going to send it, upload it across the internet unless you wire $50 to us immediately. Once they do that, they know they have access to funds. They will ask for $100, $1,000. The E-Safety Commissioner knows of boys who have paid $10,000. I met a woman in Sydney last week whose son sold everything in the house, plus his gaming credits, his Apple vouchers, everything he could do to satisfy this, in the hope that the image that he uploaded wouldn't be distributed to everyone he knows. And it's not me saying epidemic proportions, of the AFP, Julian Grant, police officers. And I think probably one of the saddest things, Dan, is our teenagers are finding it so damn hard to come out of that room and say, you know, Mum, I've stuffed up. Dad, I've stuffed up. I need your help. So what police are seeing is just the tip of the iceberg of this.
This is utterly chilling. As I've been reading about this today, it is so confronting. One, as you're telling those instances there, Madonna, your book reveals that 70% of child pornography is that, as you're mentioning there, is self-produced. So then what happens if there's that follow-through and the photos get released or are actually used to do damage? Is that happening, or is it all just about trying to get money?
Well, certainly there are cases when it has happened. In many cases, you don't know if they're going to upload those or not, but our children are not taking it to police to take over in the first instance. You know, and I think the authorities in America, I talked to the FBI, Europol, AFP, everyone I can think of, including the wonderful Michael Salter on your panel. And I think last year, 3/4 of the 85 million images on the dark web, circulating the dark web in America, had previously been seen. You know, and as one police officer said to me, once they're out there, there's no getting them back. They're not a boomerang. And I think with the introduction of AI, particularly in computer games, this is beyond frightening, because police struggle to work out how they might police it. End-to-end encryption will mean that their job, and a parent's job to even check what their child is doing, is even harder. And the baddies, the pedophiles or the organised crime gangs, are au fait. They're really clever with the technology. And it's just such an unfair battle, isn't it, between an organised crime gang and a 14-year-old boy, or an online serial pedophile and a 16-year-old girl. And I would say to parents listening, you know, if this comes to your attention, please don't blame your child. I think in some ways maybe that's why they're not coming out and telling us. They're humiliated, they're embarrassed, but we shouldn't blame them. We should say, all right, our job is to actually try and address this and fix it. To those boys who are saying they can't access any money, the AFP says they are being encouraged to open bank accounts so that money is then laundered through Australia. And in their words, we could become a middle ring of money laundering Australia. And so, at every level, our schools are throwing their hands up going, we need to do something about this. Parents are really asking for help. And I'm so pleased, Dan, that we're talking about it, because there needs to be a national conversation where we can say to our kids, this is happening. It's scammers like the marriage scams, the scams during COVID. Don't get caught, and this is what you need to do.
Michael, you're an expert in this field. Just tell me, how prevalent is this extortion and weaponising of children's photos?
Look, incredibly prevalent. Madonna sort of outlined that this is taking place on an industrial scale. So organised crime syndicates that previously were doing different sorts of online scams anyway, a couple of years ago, probably 2.5 years ago, did a big pivot in their business model. And since then, we've seen rapid escalations in sexual extortion, targeting boys. It's a financially motivated crime rather than a sexually motivated crime. And all of our evidence is that it's increasing week on week and month on month. I think another challenge for us is that as we try to countermand their strategies, they are also adapting to our tactics. So it's quite a rapidly evolving crime type. I think Madonna's absolutely right, which is there has to be a conversation with young people about this. We need to be really clear about the nature of this kind of outreach and contact with kids from strangers, and the movement towards the sharing of sexual images. That needs to be a really open conversation with teenage boys. I think we've got some questions about why it is that social media companies that are actively cultivating a teenage user base, it's been so easy for, pirates in Nigeria to take over and pretend to be a teenage girl on Instagram or on Snap or on WhatsApp. Why aren't social media companies doing more to keep kids safe? And why is the burden falling on kids and parents and teachers?
Catherine, I want to bring you in. That you work in the space of protecting children. How do you reconcile or reckon with this?
Oh, it's alarming and it's concerning, and I think one of the things people don't realise is how fast it happens. And I think it was, 3 days or something. Madonna was speaking to with boys, being able to elicit
Three minutes. 3 minutes, I think it was.
Was it 3
yeah,
minutes?
3
Sorry,
minutes.
my goodness. And it happens fast, and it can happen to anyone. And one of the conversations that comes up in the rooms that I go into is that children don't tell their parents, they tell their best friends. So the people that need to help them aren't there. And then if they do need help, they don't know where to go to. So those doors are closed. And then when they do hear about people getting help, they hear that it's really tough because you might end up in a court of law or a system like that that is really unfriendly to children. So I think there needs to be a lot done to not only educate parents to say, listen, if this happens to you, you are okay, but also be really clear that the chances are they might not tell you. My children, whenever I try to have a conversation like this, go running for the door. But how do we enable those people around them, those people that they trust, to be able to take that information and say, hey, go in this direction. Make sure that those doors are open, that those doors are accessible. Make sure everyone who needs the information they need to help children understand what happens, when they might be at risk, and what you might do if you get into trouble.
Madonna, what is this task force Argos doing that is really cutting through?
Look, I think it's one particular person, in a sense, former Inspector John Rouse. I was told from the FBI and Interpol is probably the world's leader in this. And he's recently retired and he's devoted 40 years, 39 and a half years of his life to protecting children. He's run international operations, including the FBI and Interpol. He has saved countless thousands of kids. And I want to give him kudos and all our police officers because, they never make the headlines. And when I was writing the book, he wasn't too keen at first. And I kept talking about predators. And he said, I'm not interested in predators. Our KPI is saving children. And I think that's a terrific thing. And, you know, recently we've heard of charges against someone alleged to have hurt so many children. It's one person, where Michael will tell you there are millions of people with a propensity to do this. On the dark web, we have millions of photos and millions of people trading in photos. With AI, we'll be able to keep the child's head and maybe take off their clothes in a publicly uploaded photo a parent or a school has put on of a ballet concert and trade that on the web. And we can't sit here, and Michael said so beautifully, you know, that it falls on parents and teachers and kids. Yeah, our government said no to age verification. The tech companies, in the words of one expert, are not eating their own breakfast. And it is about time that I think they were called to account, and we did this because we should all have at the centre of our attention is our children, and they need our help here.
Michael, to parents that are watching this tonight, how do they start to have that conversation and build the trust to if this happens or is happening to you, how to navigate it?
I mean, trust is the key word. You know, we put boundaries around technology use, and I think there's really sensible things to do, particularly with quite young kids, making sure that they're not alone with a tablet, these sorts of things. But it really comes down to trust because, you know, we set those boundaries, but then when kids break them, as kids sometimes do, and some kids will get into trouble just because the internet is so unsafe at the moment. And we need to, I think, get ahead of that and say, you know, if you do get into trouble, if something does happen, I'm on your team. You know, I'm on your side. I will work with you to sort this out. You're not alone. I might be a bit upset that you didn't do what I told you to do, but I'm here for you, because what offenders are doing is they're really playing on kids' fear of getting in trouble, and they're saying to them, if anyone finds out that you've done this, you know, you're gonna be in so much trouble. So we need to get ahead of that tactic and really reassure kids, like, we're here for you, we will protect you, we will make sure this is okay, and it will be okay. You know, with financial sexual extortion, it's not sexually motivated. Frankly, they don't want to share the images or the videos. And the evidence is pretty good that if kids, once this has happened, if they just cut off contact, that is the best way to de-escalate the offending behaviour with the financial sextortionist. And it's true with these sexually motivated offenders as well. The sooner you cut off contact, and look, they'll have all sorts of ways of trying to get to kids through different profiles and different social media channels. But as soon as you cut off contact and bring in an adult, the better.
Catherine, is this about resetting the relationship between children, young people and technology?
Oh, look, I guess there probably is a level of that in it, understanding that, you know, it isn't a friendly place. You know, it's good fun, but it isn't a friendly place. There are significant dangers associated in it. But I was thinking about some of the other things that might need to happen. You know, what is the impact on children long term as a result of being exposed to sextortion? I'd imagine the long-term emotional impacts are pretty big. So I think there certainly is a space there for governments to lean in a bit harder on this, because the outcomes for our children may not be good. And I'd hate to see what it looks like in terms of children wanting to self-harm, and escalating behaviours like that talk to depression, ongoing depression, that will affect long-term life outcomes for children as well.
Yeah, Madonna, you want to jump in with the last word?
I think there's certainly, and in my book, investigators talk about once those images are online, pedophiles have actually tracked down those girls, particularly years later, and contacted them. And so Catherine is exactly right, that long-term impact is absolutely horrible. But if a parent is listening, a couple of things. John Rouse, who helped me write the book, former Inspector John Rouse, said this quote to me: if you've seen what I've seen, you would never allow a device in a bedroom or a bathroom. These pictures are not being taken at the kitchen table. So why do we allow devices in a bedroom or a bathroom? And the second thing is the financial extorters will go for low-hanging fruit. So if your child has a private, secret friendship list, it makes it more difficult, not impossible, but more difficult for them to be accessed. If their friends have a private one too, it even makes it a little bit safer. So there's just a couple of tips very quickly, but we can, if we work together, together, I think mute the impact of this.
Well, thank you. And if this topic has raised any issues for you, please call Lifeline on 13 11 14 or Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36. Well, it's the final day of federal parliament before the referendum on the voice is held on October the 14th. Week 2 of the official campaign has seen a cacophony of noise, confusion and claims that misinformation is being peddled by both sides. Today, the opposition spokesperson for Indigenous Australians and No campaigner Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price told the National Press Club that a voice would leave Australia further fractured along racial fault lines, while the Prime Minister again characterised the voice as a modest proposal with the aim of delivering better outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The Drum's David Taylor takes us through events in Canberra.
After walking 650 kilometres from Melbourne in support of the voice to Parliament, AFL great Michael Long arrives in the nation's capital. Anthony Albanese walking the last few steps of the journey with Long as a symbol of his support. And in the Prime Minister's courtyard, a public handshake to capture the essence, the PM says, of the voice proposal.
This is such a modest proposal. This is a hand outstretched, asking for the hand to be joined. That's all it is. Who in Australia, when a hand goes out, dismisses it and doesn't shake? That's what we're asking of Australians.
Michael Long of Essendon.
The champion former football player has a simple message for Australians ahead of the referendum on October 14.
It's about love. It's about listening. It's about giving Indigenous people power over their destiny, so that their culture can be a gift to this country for everyone.
The WA Liberals for No campaign.
The official road to the voice referendum is now in its second week.
My friends, please recognise our spirit and our people and our place.
Both sides are accusing the other of peddling lies and personal attacks. Today, the Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, outlined her concerns at the National Press Club.
I know myself, Warren Mundine, have been the subject of horrible racial vilification. Right up until my phone number, my personal phone number, was shared on Twitter yesterday, and I was absolutely bombarded with the most revolting messages, voicemail messages that you could think of.
She blames the Prime Minister for the division.
He chose to take this path to divide our nation, to not undergo the appropriate processes to involve the Australian people in constitutional conventions and to bring everybody along for the ride. And I condemn all kinds of horrible behaviour that has come out as a result of this.
But Anthony Albanese insists the voice would be a vital step in closing the gap of Indigenous disadvantage.
If we do the same thing through the same method, in the same way, we should expect the same outcomes. We need to do better.
And we are just awaiting the spokesperson for the Australians for Unity campaign and Liberal Party member Warren Mundine to join us this evening. Catherine, I want to start with you first. Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, the Shadow Indigenous Australians Minister, was asked about calls for an independent commissioner for the protection of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children. The Senator touched on calls that have been made in the past by Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, for a Royal Commission into sexual abuse of Aboriginal children, adding that the leading national body for Aboriginal children downplayed the claims of the high rates of sexual abuse of Aboriginal children. How do you respond?
Oh, look, that's silliness. If the Senator would like a briefing on what the evidence currently shows, then we're more than happy to show her what the figures are showing, what's leading to our children being overrepresented in the child protection system, what the causes of harm to our children are. We're more than happy to have that conversation. The calls for a National Commission have been have been around for more than 40 years. And since the Bringing Them Home report, right, the Bringing Them Home report, the Royal Commission, the landmark commission into what was happening with our children and the impacts of colonisation, the impacts of transgenerational trauma. Since then, there have been more than 33 national investigations, including numerous royal commissions, and every single one of them found exactly the same thing, and that is our children are being removed because the system has inherent bias and racism within it. Now, that's not calling people racist, that is saying that there is a problem within the way the child protection system is working, within the way families are being treated. Where there is a failure to invest in families, there is a failure to invest in the infrastructure that keeps families strong. And to be very clear on this, the calls for the National Commissioner have been recognised by both sides of government. In actual fact, so the previous government actually committed to the establishment of a national advocate in recognition of the fact that something was needed to stop what was happening for our children, and that is the gross overrepresentation of our children in child protection systems, the failure to ensure that all our children are on track developmentally by the time they hit preschool so that they're actually able to engage in the education system. Those are the things that we really need to be paying attention to. And let me be very clear on child sexual abuse. One case is too many, and we take that very, very seriously. But what we need is an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Commissioner that is fully empowered and fully legislated, that can shine a light into every single one of those deep recesses and say, this is what's happening with our children, and this is how we stop it, and this is how we ensure accountability.
Catherine, do you think such a person in such a role would be the game changer in dealing with those structural challenges that are creating a deficit that you're mentioning?
The issue is there is no accountability. So people talk about this all the time, but what we don't have is accountability. And absolutely, that is what a National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Commissioner would represent. Now, this hasn't only been SNAICC calling for it. Last week, every single one of the child commissioners in Australia backed in this call and said, listen, it is well overdue. It needs to happen. We need some accountability. That was also joined by international commissioners, and every single one of the child protection experts in Australia, they are saying if we want genuine change, if we really want to see the best outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, we need to invest in this, because when you look at things like the Closing the Gap targets, it is the targets relating to children that are grossly off track, and that includes the overrepresentation of our children in child protection. That includes the fact that our children are not developmentally on track by the age of 5. Those targets are slipping backwards, and there are direct policy lines to policy decisions that attribute to those stats.
Senator Nampijinpa Price also said, Catherine, again, that she didn't believe the voice to Parliament was the way ahead and akin to being another layer of bureaucracy, but that it was creating these great lines of division. She was asked about, do you believe the history of colonisation continues to have an impact on some Indigenous Australians? Senator Nampijinpa Price said, quote, no, I'll be honest with you, no, I do not think so. A positive impact, absolutely. I mean, now we have running water, readily available food. What do you make of that?
Look, I'm not going to lie, I love running water and readily available food. That is awesome, but the truth of it is for many of our children, food and running water are not actually available at this point in time, particularly for children who live in remote areas or children whose families are living below the poverty line. Again, when you think about things that we see in the Northern Territory relating to child notifications, a lot of those things relate to things like scabies and lice. They're environmental things. They're things that would be solved if parents actually had access to running water, if they had access to houses that were appropriate to the family size, if the infrastructure that supports those houses was supported. Again, when you think about the other piece of that story relating to the impact of colonisation, look, this is something that is globally recognised. The UN has, a declaration on the rights of Indigenous peoples. There's a reason for that. It's because in every colonised country in the world, every single colonised country in the world, the outcomes for First Nations people are the same. Now that includes places like Ireland and Scotland. These things are common. So that to say that colonisation doesn't have a detrimental impact on First Nations people, regardless of what country they are on, it's nonsensical, and it's not supported by any evidence.
Well, the spokesperson for the Australians for Unity campaign and Liberal Party member Warren Mundine joins us now. I think caught up on flights. Good to have you along.
It's great to be here.
Warren, you were at the speech that Senator Napachimpa Price gave today at the National Press Club. I just want to get your reaction. I'm not sure if you heard the question just a moment ago about the question that the Senator was asked about the history of colonisation and whether that was still having an impact. The Senator said, no, I'll be honest with you, I do not think so. A positive impact, absolutely. I mean, now we have running water, readily available food. How did you react to that?
Look, I find this interesting in regard to colonisation trauma going through generations after generations, and they talk about trauma. Well, if you're to believe that, then the Jewish people who come out of the Holocaust would be laying in a fetal position on the ground, and not have been able to build Israel, not been able to do the things that they have done in the world. So I think this is overrated. I think they talk about it a lot. You know, we don't have any trauma in my family. We move forward, and it's a lot with other families and that as well. So I think, you know, if you're looking at these things and you're making up excuses for them, I don't see the trauma whatsoever from colonisation.
Warren, I was in Walgett a couple of weeks ago and I met a man there named Victor Beale who told me about his dad being taken as a child when he went down to get eggs in the river. The police arrested or took him away and he was put in a boys' home, a member of the Stolen Generation. Victor was telling me that even now, he's an older man, that this still has impacts on him. And when him and his family see police officers, they have an almost visceral reaction to that blue uniform. He was tearing up as he was telling me that. Surely that is him saying that the impacts of policies of the past are still impacting his family right now.
Well, in regard to that, that's a person who was taken away. And of course you have some trauma in that when it affects you. But the idea that something that happened 200 years ago still affects you today. Just about every country in the world has been invaded and colonised and have brutal histories within it. But they move forward, and just about every race in the world have all moved forward into this area. I just find this, this excuse to me of we're not allowed to move forward. We can't do things. We can't do this and do that. Well, how come we got all these people through university and they're doctors and lawyers and accountants and engineers and so on? How come we got all these tradies that are out there? How come my grandparents and all them worked hard in the cattle industry and did these things and built a future for us kids? I think there's too much of this victimhood that goes on and grievances rather than actually saying, OK, how do we move forward and how we do things? If you keep on making up excuses for kids and how are they going to move forward? You know, my parents taught me not to be a victim. They taught me not to take grievances. They said, move forward and you take responsibility for yourself in it. It was like what happened with the Jewish people after the Holocaust. It's like what's happened to, what's happening in Rwanda with the Hutsis and Tutsis, Cambodia rebuilding itself after the killing fields. These things, the idea that 100 years later, 200 years later, they still affect you. It's almost like the war in Yugoslavia when Holbrooke was doing the peace agreement. He's talking to Mladic, and Mladic said, I can't make peace with these people. They burnt my village down. They took my land. They raped and killed people. And Holbrooke was shocked and said, OK. He said, let's go and look at your village. I can't believe this. And he went to the village and the village was pristine. And he said, when did this happen? And he said, 1546. So they're still living the past. We should learn about the past. We should know about the past, and we should be able to not become captive of the past.
Catherine, I've got the sense that you probably want to respond to that. I also want to ask you about what we've heard from a number of leaders, including the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, the Indigenous Australians Minister, Linda Burney, and including Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, calling for a respectful debate because the tone has deteriorated so much.
Yeah.
What are you seeing and hearing on that front?
Oh, look, I'm hearing that our children are incredibly distressed by the conversations that are being had around them. I know that we recently celebrated our National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Children's Day, and I can tell you our posts were hit with the most vile vitriol you could imagine. And I'm not going to platform it because I don't play in the mud. I'm not interested in it. But I can tell you it's nasty out there. I can tell you that the hits that we take personally are horrific. The things that are posted on social media are horrific. I can bet you bottom dollar that anything I say right now, there will be a barrage of assaults because that's the way it is playing out. It's not okay. You know, this is Australia. We should be able to have, you know, a respectful debate. Australia is famous for its nuance that has always said, look, what about a fair go? And when I'm talking about a fair go, there are a couple of things I would like to pick up on. So Walgett, great example. The average male life expectancy in Walgett is 48. 48 is the average male life expectancy. That's not a fair go. There is something seriously going wrong in that community. When we talk about the impact of the Holocaust and removal of Jewish people from their lands, there is significant evidence and a lot of literature that shows that they actually are impacted on by things like transgenerational trauma. The work of Colin Tatz, you know, an incredible professor, is revolutionary in this space, and it was pioneered out of Australia, and it shows that the lasting impacts of the Holocaust and the fact that people have had to move from place to place actually do impact on things like physiology, and there are certain health outcomes that are unique to Jewish people as a result of transgenerational trauma. So that's, again, it's nonsensical. There is significant evidence that points to all of this. And again, I'll go back to it. There is a reason that there is a UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. It is because the outcomes on Indigenous people as a result of colonisation continue. Now, a lot of that is actually based on the fact that they weren't at the table when policies were developed. They're not at the table when we need to have those conversations that say, hey, we're about to decentralise Centrelink. We're going to put everything, we're going to centralise it. We're going to put all government services into town. So if you live in a remote community where it costs $4 a litre for fuel and your Centrelink has been cut off and there are no communications out here because, you know what, we haven't invested in the infrastructure for technology like phones to work in this region, you are going to have to find, without any money, a way to get into town. While you're in town, you're going to have to find somewhere to live, $10 a night per person if you're lucky, plus find food, plus find other forms of help, plus find a way back home on no money. When you get into that Centrelink office, this is what they're going to say, where is your ID? If you're from the bush, the chances are you don't have that available to you. And it goes on, and it goes on, and it goes on. This is what transgenerational trauma looks like. Again, that was a fantastic example. We're so proud of our doctors and our lawyers. I've got two brothers, they're doctors, I'll just brag about that. My mother has a law degree, I'm going to brag about that. That's fantastic. Here's what the stats say. In Australia, if you are an Aboriginal person, you are more likely to be locked up in juvenile detention than you are to get a university degree. That is what transgenerational trauma looks like.
Warren, you've spoken publicly about the toll that this campaign has had. Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price touched on it today. We heard David Liddle proud talking about, to the ABC this afternoon, about elements of protection that the Senator has needed. What are you seeing and what impact is it having on you?
Well, look, it had a lot of impact on me, and it's really strange, you know, and no one comes to the table with clean hands on this. No one from the Yes campaign and no one from the No campaign come to this table with clean hands. The racial abuse, I've never seen so much racial abuse in the last 12 months than I have seen since I was a kid. It is just amazing. And look, and this referendum was supposed to be uniting us as a nation. It is dividing us. It is dividing Aboriginal people. It's dividing Torres Strait Islander people. It's dividing migrants and non-Indigenous Australians. It has just been a whole mess from day one. And this is why people are reacting the way they are. This is a waste of money. We could have spent, the $500 million that's going to be spent on all this, from when they started promoting this. And it's about time that we started focusing on the real issues that happen in these communities. My family, they come from Bayugal. The road was a dead-end road. And they worked on cattle stations and worked hard all their life since the 1830s when white people first come up to this area. It's about, I don't think we promote enough good things that Aboriginal people do. I see Aboriginal people successful in business. I see Aboriginal people who are successful in academia. I see Aboriginal people like yourself, Dan, on TV. I see Aboriginal people doing a lot of things. I don't know anyone who's motivated by victimhood and motivated by grievance and motivated to do good things when all you do is talk about the bad things. There is a million good things that are happening out there. We need to focus on them, and we need to show kids that they can that the world's their oyster and they shouldn't be dragged down by the past.
Can I ask you might think that this is that I'm focusing on one of the bad things, Warren, but the No campaign has been accused of asking volunteers to spread, quote, fear and misinformation and flat out lie is what the allegation is an effort to convince referendum voters of its agenda and to avoid saying which side of the Voice to Parliament debate they were from. Do you support that campaigning?
No, I don't. And you know me, I don't lie. I don't go out and racially abuse people. I go out and talk about positive things that we need to do and move forward. And look, and I think that some of this stuff, quite frankly, as I just said, I admit we got problems on our side. It's about time the Yes campaign admitted they have problems. What I've heard over the last few days of the racial abuse coming from the Yes campaign is just dreadful. It's about time we stop that. We stop doing that and stop calling people's names and start talking about prosecuting your case for yes and prosecuting your case for no.
Well, Professor Marcia Langton has been in the eye of the political storm this week. The Indigenous Leader Voice campaigner and one of the architects of a possible model was speaking at a public forum in Western Australia on Sunday where she made these comments in a Q&A session.
Every time the No case raises one of their arguments, if you start pulling it apart, you get down to base racism. I'm sorry to say it, but that's where it lands. Or just sheer stupidity.
Parts of the media seized on that as Langton accusing Australians of being racist, fuelling fierce criticism from No campaigners and the coalition in Parliament. On Wednesday, Professor Langton responded.
I was asked by a woman who had been told that if the Yes vote succeeds, Aborigines will be getting compensation. So I explained to her that nobody gets compensation unless a court orders it or an authority makes that order. And I don't believe that most Australians are racist, and I'm certainly not a racist. But what I was saying was that the claims made by the No campaign are based in racism and stupidity, and that's a completely different kind of statement altogether.
And Catherine, how did you assess this?
Oh, look, I've certainly seen Aboriginal people being demonised, absolutely demonised. I don't belong to either the Yes campaign or the No campaign. Do I have a statement on it? Absolutely. I believe that people should be leaning into this because I work for SNAICC, right? This is what we've been advocating for more than 40 years, and that is the ability to influence the policy so that the programs delivered for us are actually suitable to us. This is something that we've advocated for fiercely, but I can tell you what, those 260 hits that we take every time we put up a post, that is a bot, and those posts are horrific and they are dehumanising. And even think about that conversation that you repeated to me just before, which mentioned, you know, that we downplayed child sexual abuse. On what planet does the Child Protection Peak downplay child sexual abuse? This is crazy stuff. It is done to dehumanise. It is done to downgrade your efficiency and your reputation. Like that's not okay. That's not okay. We are the Child Protection Peak. Not okay.
Warren, was the No campaign targeting Marcia Langton?
Oh, and that's rubbish. I've never heard so much rubbish in all my life. She said that the No campaign was based on racism or stupidity. You know, how hilarious is that? Now, here she is trying to say, oh, we shouldn't have racism and we shouldn't be abusing people. And then at the same time, she turns around and said, oh, well, I'm a member of that campaign. And I can tell you that is a whole lot of bullshit. That's what I can tell you. And because they can't point to anything that we've done that actually is racist or stupidity. So, look, I just find it weird that she can get up there and say these dreadful things about people, and then and everyone give her a free card. Well, you know, I'm glad that people have jumped on it and called her out. She has a reputation for this. We in the last few days we've seen videos and comments that she's made over the years. And I know Aboriginal people who, and I was speaking with today, have cropped stuff from her. It's about time people stopped abusing people, stopped using racist terms and insulting people, and actually prosecuted her case. If she's upset and angry because
Marcia Langton, Warren would refute all of that and would deny that she was says and told me so that she was speaking about the campaigns.
The evidence is clearly there.
Dan, I think also the other thing we need to point to, and this has been prosecuted, and that is the independent fact checkers. All right, several independent fact checkers have found mistruth and misdirection. Like, seriously,
and guess
come
what?
on.
They were found out to be
Don't
as
pretend
well.
that hasn't happened. Do not pretend.
Even the ABC come out and said that things that I said was true.
This is not true.
I'm afraid I've got to jump in now. We are out of time. We've run out of time. That is all we've got for tonight. Thanks to our panel, Michael Salter, Warren Mundine, Madonna King and Catherine Liddle. Have an excellent evening. Julia Baird's back with you tomorrow. For now, though, good night.